I'm your brother Jamal Zaheen, the Outreach Manager here at IIOC. Just want to welcome you guys over to the Islamic Institute of Orange County for our Friday Family Night program. We have a very special and very interesting program here tonight, and that's how Islam entered Spain. So if you guys have noticed here at IIOC for the last, I would say probably year, 2 years, we're really trying to educate ourselves here and of course, by extension, our community about how Islam entered different places and different regions, right? This is very important for us, of course, in the work of outreach and da'wah as well, and of course, just for our own benefit as well, to learn as much as we can. So today is no different. We have a very interesting and very unique program, and that is with Sheikh Jamil Besada and our dear Sheikh Mustafa Umar, and that is how Islam enters Spain, or España. So our program is going to be, of course, starting momentarily in about a minute. We're going to go for about maybe like an hour or so. We'll have some time for QA at the end. So if you guys do have questions, if you want to maybe just remind yourself by writing it down or just making a mental note of it, that'll be good. And then we'll take questions at the end. 9:15 should be Isha. So then we'll conclude right about around 9:15-ish, inshallah. So Sheikh Jamil Besada is going to go ahead and start us off. He's our religious director at the Corona Masjid, Islamic Society of Corona, Norco. And then, of course, Sheikh Mustafa Umar, the director of California Islamic University, and also our director of education and outreach here at IIOC. So we're blessed and honored to have both great speakers and shuyukh here. So without further ado, if I can pass it over to Sheikh Jamil Besada, we'll go ahead and begin our program. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلوات والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين على سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Tonight's lecture is entitled How Islam Came to Spain, and the majority of the focus tonight will be on just that, how Islam reached Spain. But Sheikh Mustafa said that it would be unjust to all of you to just kind of leave you hanging with how Islam came to Spain and not tell you what happened to Islam in Spain. So the majority of the focus in the talk tonight will be about how Islam arrived in Spain, which will be my portion. And then inshallah, Sheikh Mustafa will be discussing what happened to Islam in Spain and the eventual fall of Islam in the Iberian Peninsula. I have a lot to cover, so I'm going to perhaps talk very, very fast. And please forgive me if something is unclear. Inshallah, we'll make it up in the Q&A section, inshallah. Bismillah. All right. This individual here, Uqba ibn Nafi' was one of the generals of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu. Uqba ibn Nafi' was the nephew of Amr ibn al-As radiyallahu anhu. Even though Uqba was born during the lifetime of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he never actually met the Prophet alaihi salatu wasallam, and thus is not considered, according to the majority opinion, to be a companion. When Uqba ibn Nafi' was with Umar ibn al-Khattab, he started to go and creep into North Africa along with Amr ibn al-As. For those of you that know Amr ibn al-As, he was one of the ones that entered into Egypt very, very early on. Uqba ibn Nafi' was with him and eventually started to spread more and more into North Africa. After the time of Uthman and Ali radiallahu anhuma, Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan became the Khalifa of the Umayyad Empire and reappointed Uqba ibn Nafi' to resume his campaigns in northern Africa. Uqba ibn Nafi', as many individuals, were very, very hasty in terms of their conquest. And what do I mean by that? What I meant is Uqba ibn Nafi' would go miles and miles and miles of conquering lands in a very, very short amount of time. And if you're familiar with conquests, what usually happens when you conquer a large area very, very quickly? People often rebel against you. And we're going to see this theme of establishing cities and conquering them too fast and the people rebelling is going to be something that we're going to see throughout the evening, inshallah. So, for those of you that are familiar with the city of Qayrawan in northern Africa, Uqba ibn Nafi' was one of the ones who established the city of Qayrawan. he dies at the age of 63. At the 63 after Hijrah, Uqba ibn Nafi'. And as I mentioned, as he's moving west over North Africa, he's conquering. But what is he not doing? He's not establishing cities. He's not taking the time to build them, to establish them, to create schools, to create foundations for the society. He conquers and he leaves. He conquers and he leaves. So what ends up happening, by the time that Uqba ibn Nafi' passes away, all of North Africa is in rebellion against the Muslims, because he didn't take the time to establish these cities. So when Uqba ibn Nafi' passes away, an individual by the name of Musa ibn Nusayr, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh, begins to take over. Musa ibn Nusayr has a very, very interesting story. The story of his origin. When Khalid ibn al-Walid radiyallahu anhu was conquering territory in the Persian Roman area, the legend goes that Khalid ibn Walid stumbled across a church. And when he went into this church, he found young boys essentially owned by the church. So Khalid ibn Walid decided that he would take these boys with him and he would drop them off in a nearby Islamic city so that these boys could get the Islamic tarbiyah that they needed. These boys, and I'll tell you their names right now, Nusayr, Sirin, and Yasar. All three of these young boys ended up converting to Islam. Musa ibn Nusayr was the son of one of these three men that converted to Islam. So you're going to see the legacy of this young boy through his son Musa ibn Nusayr. The other boy that I mentioned, Sirin, does that name ring a bell? Ibn Sirin. Sirin's son would end up becoming a very, very great scholar in our tradition, Ibn Sirin. And the last one was Yasar. Yasar. His grandson, so not his immediate son, but his grandson was Muhammad ibn Ishaq. Who's Muhammad ibn Ishaq? The author of the famous book of Sirah. The famous book of Sirah, the one that we all base off our Sirah knowledge of for the most part, was written by his grandson, Ibn Ishaq. So Nusayr joins the army under Muawiyah. So not Musa, but his father, joins the army under Muawiyah and starts to spend a lot of time in the company of princes and governors because he starts to gain that tutelage with Muawiyah radiallahu anhu. When Muawiyah passes away and Yazid comes into power, Nusayr sticks with Yazid. And when Abdullah ibn Zubayr comes into power, he then joins Ibn Zubayr as well. When Musa ibn Nusayr, growing up in the company of his father and growing up in the company of all of these people, starts to learn strategy, starts to learn military tactics, starts to learn from the mistakes of Uqba ibn Nafi', the one who in North Africa left all of these different cities in rebellion when he passed away. Musa ibn Nusayr was appointed by the Khalifa at that time to go back into North Africa and take care of all of the rebellions that were taking place. I mentioned that Uqba ibn Nafi' went across northern Africa in a matter of months. Musa ibn Nusayr crossed northern Africa in 6 years. Meaning what? Meaning that when he reached a city, he stopped, he established schools, he took his time, he made sure that he would bring scholars from these areas so that people could teach the people there. And once the cities were established, once the ulama were there, once the masajid were built, once the schools were built, he would move on to the next place. So by the time Musa ibn Nusayr reached the other side of Africa, all of northern Africa by and large was peacefully under Muslim rule. When Musa ibn Nusayr gets to a city called Tangiers on the other side of northern Africa, on the west side, he meets a man by the name of Tariq ibn Ziyad. the famous Tariq ibn Ziyad. Tariq ibn Ziyad was of Berber origin. And if you're familiar with the Berbers are a native people to North Africa, and it is one thing is said about the Berbers. They are a very difficult people to conquer. So Tariq ibn Ziyad was born Muslim, of Berber origin, and because he was raised Muslim, he knew how to read and speak Arabic. So what happened was, during the time of, if we take a look here, right? So we're talking about the expansion of the Khalifa al-Rashidun. So during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, all of this became in the territory of the Muslims. When we're talking about North Africa, during the time of Umar and Uthman radiallahu anhu, it reached here. And then through the assistance of Musa ibn Nusayr, it was able to reach all up until this side here. So all of North Africa now was under the protection of the Muslims. And we'll talk about Spain in just a second. When Musa ibn Nusayr reaches to the other side, and he has Tariq ibn Ziyad with him, he starts to look north to Spain. But what was the problem with Spain? He didn't know anything about it. How can I conquer a land that I don't know anything about? How am I supposed to go into a land where I don't know anything about the land, the topography, the people, nothing? It is my firm belief that subhanAllah, through the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cause people and places and circumstances to align perfectly, to set the stage for certain things to happen. What do I mean by that? When Tariq ibn Ziyad and Musa ibn Nusayr were interested in going to into Al-Andalus, into Spain, they wrote back to the Khalifa, Al-Walid ibn Malik, to ask for permission to enter into the Iberian Peninsula. So they sent a letter all the way back to Damascus to get permission, and then the letter came all the way back. What was going on in Spain, however, at this time? There was a king by the name of Rodrigo, who you see on the screen now. Rodrigo had basically overthrown the previous king and had positioned himself as the king of the Visigoths in Spain, because the Visigoths were the people that were in charge or in control of Spain at that time. So he appoints himself king. And what happens usually when you overthrow the previous king? The allies of the previous king are not too happy with you. Right? There's a very, very interesting myth about Rodrigo that I want to share with you for a moment. Rodrigo, the myth goes that whenever a king of the Visigoths was appointed, it was the sunnah of the Visigoths that they would visit this particular tower. And what they would do is that the legend was that there was a curse on this tower. And the people around, the wuzara, the advisors to Rodrigo, told him, listen, all you need to do in the sunnah of the other kings, you put a padlock on the door of this tower, and the tower was filled with padlocks from all of the other kings. Put a padlock on the door to make sure that the curse doesn't come to you, and let's be on our way. But what happens when, as they say, curiosity often ends up doing what to the cat? Killing him. Rodrigo said, I want to see what's inside. I want to see what's inside that tower. So his advisors come to him and they say, look, how tall is the tower? How wide is the tower? How much treasure do you probably think is in that tower? We'll double it for you, but don't open that tower. So Rodrigo said what? Nope, I'm still going to open that tower. So what does he do? He opens the tower and he goes inside, and what does he find? Nothing. You know what he finds inside? He finds a table with a piece of parchment on it. And the parchment had the drawing of a battle. And the battle was of people that had the heads and bodies of lions defeating another army. And on this portrait, it said, the ruler that opens this door, your kingdom will fall to these people. So now Rodrigo, when he opens this door to this tower, becomes super paranoid. Perfect timing, right? So what happened to Rodrigo? Rodrigo, the previous king that he overthrew, had an ally by the name of Julian, King Julian, who ruled in a small area in northern Africa. Musa ibn Nusayr and Tariq ibn Ziyad go to King Julian and they tell him, what can you tell us about Andalus and Spain? And he said, well, I know that King Rodrigo's there. And I know that when I went to visit him, he took my sister captive. And I was an ally with the previous king. I'll tell you everything you want to know. So Musa ibn Nusayr got all of the inside information about Al-Andalus, about where was what, about the topography, about all of the different areas around it from King Julian. And then King Julian was even gracious enough to offer ships to Musa ibn Nusayr and Tariq ibn Ziyad to go ahead and cross the sea to make it to Al-Andalus, to the Iberian Peninsula. With the help of King Julian, with the help of these ships, and eventually with the permission of the Umayyad Khalifa, Tariq ibn Ziyad would eventually cross the Strait of Gibraltar and land, and this is a picture of Tariq ibn Ziyad, and his landing at Gibraltar, would eventually land where? In Gibraltar, Jabal Tariq. Gibraltar, Jabal Tariq. So you'll notice that Tariq ibn Ziyad left from this point here, Sweta, and he crossed to the area of Gibraltar with the ships of King Julian and the permission of the Umayyad Khalifa. When King Rodrigo hears that there's an army that lands on the Iberian Peninsula, what do you think he does? He freaks out. And he raises an army of 100,000 men because he is afraid that the prophecy that he stumbled upon was going to turn into reality. There is a legend that when Tariq ibn Ziyad landed in Gibraltar, again, legend, huh? None of the major books of history mention it, but it's an interesting legend, so I'm going to mention it. It says that when Tariq ibn Ziyad arrived in Gibraltar, and he heard that King Rodrigo was on his way to meet him with 100,000 men, that he burned the ships that he came over with. And then he turned to his army of men, about 7,000 men. And he turns to them and he says, the sea is behind you and death is in front of you. And the only thing that's going to save you are your swords. So I'll see you on the other side. So through this very impassioned speech, the army of Tariq ibn Ziyad proceeded forward. Tariq ibn Ziyad asked for reinforcements from Musa ibn Nusayr, and they came. And 12,000 people landed at Wadi Gharbat, in an area in southern Spain, to meet the army of King Rodrigo. There is a weak hadith, and I'm mentioning it, and I'm telling you that it's weak. There is a weak hadith that says that an army of believers that is 12,000 strong will never be defeated. And coincidentally, what is the number that we had at Wadi Gharbat? 12,000. 7,000 from Tariq ibn Ziyad and 5,000 from Musa ibn Nusayr. So this hadith also got them riled up. Tariq ibn Ziyad found Wadi Gharbat, and he noticed that the topography of the area made it to where an army of 100,000 men had to enter through a very, very narrow space. So he said, we're going to set up the army here so that when they bottleneck, we'll be able to attack them even better. When King Rodrigo arrived, it was said that he arrived on a massive throne and that people were carrying him to the battlefield. Now I want you to pause for just one moment. We have 1,000 people in the army of King Rodrigo. And we have 12,000 in the army of Tariq ibn Ziyad. Numbers would tell you that the Muslims were surely going to be defeated. But let's do a psychological profile of the people that were actually there. On the side of the King Rodrigo, who was there? People that were perhaps forced to be there, slaves that had to be there, people that were getting paid perhaps a daily wage, people that were tired of taxes, people that were tired of being under the rule of King Rodrigo and just showed up at the battlefield because they had to. Now look at the side of the Muslims. The army of King Rodrigo, during the days leading up to and even during the days during the battle, said that we would see these Muslims fighting all day and in the nighttime praying Qiyamul Layl all night. And we had to ask ourselves, is this army from the heavens or the earth? We can't tell. Because we've never seen an army like this before in our lives. People that were there solely united in the belief in La ilaha illallah. Were there to earn something from the ghanima. Were there to spread the message of Islam. Even though they were vastly outnumbered, the motivation was starkly different. The battle began in the 28th of Ramadan. So imagine now fasting during this battle. The battle didn't last a couple of hours. The battle lasted about 8 days. So they prayed Eid al-Fitr, or they did Eid, fighting in jihad. Eventually, the army of Tariq ibn Ziyad was victorious, and King Rodrigo was never heard from again. He disappeared. The Musa ibn Nusayr and Tariq ibn Ziyad would continue to move north. Tariq ibn Ziyad reached a small town by the name of Ishbiliya, or Seville. And when he approached Seville, he asked the people, he said, خِيَارُكُمْ ثَلَاثَةً. You have 3 options. You pay the jizya, and you keep your possessions. You leave, or you accept Islam. Which one is it going to be? The people in Seville and this area were so sick and tired of people coming in, pillaging the village, taking advantage of them, killing them, that the fact that people were coming and actually tell them, you keep your possessions. Just pay us the jizya. That they were actually welcoming these people with open arms into their cities. What was the jizya back then, or what is jizya? Jizya is a tax that is paid from non-Muslims to the Muslims for the protection. It was said that the jizya of that time, the time that we're talking about now, was about 1 dinar a year. Less than the zakat that the Muslims were paying themselves. Who has to pay jizya in the first place? Women are exempt from paying jizya. Children are exempt from paying jizya. Disabled people are exempt from paying jizya. People who aren't able to earn a living are exempt from paying jizya. Religious people that dedicate their lives to the worship of God are also exempt from paying jizya. The only one that jizya applies to are working men. So paying jizya was a lot better than paying taxes to the kings, and at the end of the day, not having any type of guaranteed protection. Tariq ibn Ziyad continues to move forward through Spain. So he stopped here in Seville, kept going north to Granada, to Cordoba, and kept moving forward. When he reached the city of Toledo, he was under strict orders from Musa ibn Nusayr not to advance any further. But Tariq ibn Ziyad saw the momentum that his army had, saw how the people were opening their doors and welcoming him. And he decided that it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission. So he writes a letter to Musa ibn Nusayr in northern Africa, and he tells him, I'm going, I'm sorry, but the momentum is too great. So he continues to move forward. But what did we learn from Musa ibn Nusayr and Uqba ibn Nafi'? What was the lesson that we learned? Establish the towns before you move on. As soon as Tariq ibn Ziyad left Seville, rebellion erupted again. And this time, Musa ibn Nusayr crossed with his own army into Spain to quell the rebellion in Seville. Eventually, Tariq ibn Ziyad and Musa ibn Nusayr were reunited after about 2 years of not having been in contact with one another. They reached all the way until the French border, here. And as we'll see in a bit, one of the Muslim armies even made its way all the way up to Tours, about 30 kilometers outside of Paris. Muslims were also in charge of this area here. We'll see what happened in a second. When they reached the border of Spain, Musa ibn Nusayr was approached by a messenger from the Khalifa, Walid ibn. And Walid ibn Abd al-Malik told Musa ibn Nusayr, stop moving forward. Damascus, you and Tariq ibn Ziyad. All the momentum that was building up, all of the victories that were mounting for Musa ibn Nusayr and Tariq ibn Ziyad were prematurely stopped because Walid ibn Abd al-Malik decided that he wanted to call back Musa ibn Nusayr and Tariq ibn Ziyad to Damascus. In 3.5 years, Musa ibn Nusayr and were able to conquer the vast majority of the Iberian Peninsula. Why did he call them back? Why did Al-Walid ibn Abd al-Malik call them back? This is Walid ibn Abd al-Malik. Why did he call them back to Damascus? Rumors were that when Walid ibn Abd al-Malik heard that Musa ibn Nusayr had plans to conquer Europe as well, that Walid ibn Abd al-Malik thought to himself that if he's successful in conquering Europe, that the territory that he has will be much greater than the territory that I have, and I'm the Khalifa. So I need to put a stop to this. So he calls him back. Another theory is that the Umayyad dynasty was spreading itself too thin. And reinforcements from Damascus to reach into the Iberian Peninsula would have taken months. And it didn't make sense. So he said, stop where you're at and come back. When Musa ibn Nusayr and Tariq ibn Ziyad reached Damascus, Walid ibn Abd al-Malik was on his deathbed. Am I using that? Walid ibn Abd al-Malik was on his deathbed. And 3 days after arriving in Damascus, Walid ibn Abd al-Malik passed away. The successor of Walid ibn Abd al-Malik, Sulaiman ibn Abd al-Malik, also refused to allow them to return. So Musa ibn Nusayr decides that he is going to ask Sulaiman ibn Abd al-Malik for permission to go and perform Hajj. If you're not going to let me go back to Al-Andalus, at least allow me to go and perform the pilgrimage to Mecca. So he grants him that permission. Musa ibn Nusayr, the story goes that while he was at Hajj in Mecca, he made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said, Ya Allah, if it is in your decree for me that I go back to Al-Andalus, please elongate my life. But if it is in your qadr that I am not to return to Al-Andalus, then please take my life in Medina. And on his way back to Damascus, Musa ibn Nusayr passes away and is buried to this day in Al-Madinah Al-Munawwara. The conquests of Musa ibn Nusayr, all of this that Musa ibn Nusayr did, you know how old he was when he was doing that? He was over 70 years old. That picture of him was because he was conquering all of these lands at the age of 70. Now, subhanAllah, our 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds, the physical ability, myself included, by the way, the physical ability of the men now compared to the men back then, Allahul Musta'an. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq. What happened to Tariq ibn Ziyad? It was said that when Tariq ibn Ziyad was told that he could never go back to Al-Andalus, he disappeared. And history is in disagreement as to what happened to him after that. Some say that he was able to sneak his back way into Al-Andalus. Some say that he stayed in Damascus. Some say that he went to Iraq. But at the end of the day, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows exactly what happened. I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit because there's a very important story I want to get to. When Musa ibn Nusayr was told that he could not go back, he appoints his son, Abdul Aziz ibn Musa, to become the governor of Al-Andalus in his absence. And what ends up happening, and I'm going to skip over a lot of information right now, what ends up happening is that governor after governor after governor start to appoint their own people and their own tribes. And they start to discriminate against the Berbers, and they start to discriminate against other Arabs. So there came a point where everybody was fighting with one another because of the treatment that the governors were giving them. All of the positions of power were given to the people that belonged to the tribe of Al-Fihri. And everybody else was being discriminated against. Now, while this was going on in the Iberian Peninsula, what was going on in Damascus? Shortly after all of these conquests happened in northern Africa, the Umayyad dynasty collapsed and was overtaken by a movement from Khurasan, known as the Abbasids. And as the Abbasids were moving west, conquering land and taking over people and reaching to Damascus, it was said that the Abbasids were killing every single Umayyad prince that they could find. Anybody that had any type of Umayyad bloodline, any male Umayyad, was being slaughtered in the streets. One of the grandsons of one of these Khalifas, of Walid ibn Abdul Malik, his grandson Abdul Rahman I, heard that this was going on in Damascus, so he fled. The story goes that Abdul Rahman was once outside of his home taking care of his child when he noticed black flags were posted in the city. These black flags were representative that the Abbasids were now in town. So Abdul Rahman went back in his house, dropped his child off, took his brother, and they ran. Some of the Abbasids noticed that they were running. And they started chasing after them until they reached the Euphrates River. Abdul Rahman I jumped into the Euphrates River along with his brother. And the Euphrates River was very, very strong. The Abbasids, when they reached the riverbank, they said, come back, we're not going to harm you. We just want to take you in for questioning. We'll let you go, it's not a problem. Come back. The brother of Abdul Rahman I decides that he was going to go back. And when he got back to the riverbank, they picked him up and they killed him right there on the riverbank. Abdul Rahman I swam to the other side and ran. And ran and ran and ran. And it said that he ran so much, he said, I felt like I was about to fly. Abdul Rahman I, long story short, and I know I'm almost out of time. Long story short, went to northern Africa because his mother was a Berber. See how things are starting to line up? His mother was a Berber. He got protection from the Berbers. And he sent information and word to the people in Al-Andalus telling them, if you're unhappy with the governor, we have not only a Berber, but we have an Umayyad with us. Someone who has a legitimate claim to the throne. Abdul Rahman, and I'm paraphrasing a lot, Abdul Rahman ibn Muawiyah eventually would make his way into the Iberian Peninsula, and the legend says that he landed in Spain by himself, carrying nothing other than his sword. And he died in Spain with an army of over 100,000 people at his disposal. This was Abdul Rahman I, and this was him. Abdurrahman the first was the person who established the building of the Cordoba Masjid in the city of Cordoba, was established by Abdurrahman the first. There was a lot of information. I didn't have time to cover everything. I want to leave time for Sheikh Mustafa. I'm sure there's tons of questions that we can answer later on, inshallah. So I'll hand it over to Sheikh Mustafa. I apologize for the rushed presentation. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of you. Jazakumullahu khairah.
If I use this one? Yeah? Okay. We will switch back and forth. Can I just use this for now? It's more comfortable. I need permission. All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ba'd. So alhamdulillah, we teach a course on Islamic history at California Islamic University. And we cover the history of Islam in Spain in approximately maybe about 9 to 10 hours of material. So what's happening is we're trying to cram all this material in 1 hour, and of course it's challenging. So what we'll try and do is we'll try to just hit some highlight points so you get an understanding of what happened. So alhamdulillah, Abdurrahman, known as Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, he comes and he establishes unification over the area of Andalus, which we call Spain today. And he establishes a great civilization. It's not just him. It's the Muslims all around. They're developing universities. They're developing, the arts are improving. Culture is expanding. And what ends up happening is after a period of time, like every other civilization, a decline begins to set in. And the decline is for many different reasons. The decline is you don't have as competent leaders or rulers that you would in the early time. You have Muslims start to get used to, if you just look at this masjid, if you've ever been to the Cordoba Masjid, you see how beautiful it is. People begin to live this luxurious life, and eventually they become so accustomed to all of these pleasures and luxuries that they start to become a little bit lazy. They start to, become complacent with what's happening. So there's an era of decline that begins to take place. So after that decline happens, about over 100 years later, in the year 929, the area of Cordoba declares itself to be a Khalifa. So there's another Abdurrahman, comes over a century later, or more than a century later. Another Abdurrahman. This is known as Abdurrahman al-Nasir, Abdurrahman III. Same name, different time. He comes to the throne in the year 912 after a lot of political decline, and he brings together all of the different regions of Andalus. And the Christians who are still up there in the northern part of Spain, who always lived there up in the mountainous regions, he goes and he kind of makes sure that they're not coming and attacking the Muslims on a regular basis. So the question is, why did he declare himself to be Khalifa? This whole time, the Muslims are controlling Spain. They're not under the Abbasid Khilafah, but they're not claiming that they're a separate Khalifa as well. Well, there's a number of reasons why that happened. One of them is, if you go back to the map just for a second, right there, what you find is in North Africa, in this region, Qayrawan, Egypt, Qayrawan, all of these regions, there's a Fatimid empire that arises called the Ismailis. And these people declare themselves to be Khalifa. So what you have at this point in time is, you have a Khalifa in Baghdad, you have a Khalifa in Cairo, and now Spain, they say, you know what, we are completely detached from the Muslims who are in Iraq. We're going to declare our own Khilafah. So Abdurrahman goes and declares himself to be the Khalifa, and now Spain becomes a completely independent area claiming themselves to be Khalifa. So you have three claimants to be Khalifa at the same time in the Muslim world during this period. Now, what he did was he goes and he builds a bunch of things too. So if you go there, you can visit. This is Madinatul Zahra. I have more pictures of it. Okay, only one picture? Okay, we got one picture. The other picture were cut off, but it's a beautiful place, alhamdulillah. So he builds this palace city, which is known as Madinatul Zahra, unrivaled in its time. People who visited, they say at that time, it was one of the most magnificent cities in the entire world anyone has really seen. And if you go and visit just the remains of it, they're actually restoring it right now as we speak. There's excavations going on, and they're restoring it just to give people an understanding of what this city actually was like. So the region of Al-Andalus became more prosperous than it ever was, and it became a rival during this time of Abdurrahman III, became a rival to Baghdad. It was excelling in the sciences, it was excelling in the arts, it was excelling in just everything you can think of. And then if you look at just the type of people who came along during this time, you have the next Khalifa comes, his name is Al-Hakim II. He comes to power in the year 961. This guy loved books, right? And it's pretty important because, you know, rarely today you look at political leaders, it's debatable whether even they're literate sometimes, you know, the way that they're behaving. So this guy was such an intellectual. He loved books so much that he had 400,000 volumes imported from different parts of the Muslim world into the city of Cordoba. So Cordoba had one of the largest libraries, if not the largest library in the entire world at the time, full of books on every single, you know, subject of knowledge or learning that you could possibly think of. In fact, this Khalifa, he loved books so much, he didn't like to socialize with people. He used to just sit with his books and he would read. So during his time, he built masjids, he built colleges, he built hospitals, they built markets, they built many public baths, they built homes for refugees, right? Many, many different things happened, and Cordoba really became a prosperous area. And the university at Cordoba, this is when it began to really flourish. So Christians coming in from France, coming in from Germany, coming in from different places, they would come into Spain, particularly at universities like Cordoba, and they would be studying. And they would learn the sciences that the Muslims are teaching, and they would go back and they would translate their knowledge from Arabic into Latin, and they would go and translate the Muslims' books from Arabic into Latin, and then go teach it back to their own people. That's going to become significant later on. All this splendor, all this prosperity, it's not going to last. This is the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He causes things to go up and down. So by the year 1009, a civil war breaks out in Andalusia, in Al-Andalus, right? And what happens is the entire region falls apart. It's not united under one leader. And in fact, what happens is about 33 independent states form. And each place is known as a ta'ifa, right? And they have their own little princes or little kings in charge of them. So you have 33 different states. And I have a slide on that. Okay, right here. Here's some of them. The entire region that's under Muslim control, they all broke up into different regions. And they all have different leaders, and they're all vying for power with one another. So one person wants to go and attack the other person is going to attack the other person, and everyone's fighting each other. Now, despite the fact that the situation is so bad, right, you still find that despite the political problems, there was not a major intellectual decline. There was not a major cultural decline. The intellectual and literary activity, the arts, they kept on, you know, advancing, especially in the larger ta'ifas during this time. But what happened was that the Christians who were up here in the north, if you can't see myself, all this region, right, they're looking and they're going, look at this. Muslims are completely divided. Now is a perfect opportunity for us to do something. So what do? In the year 1063, Pope Alexander II, he issues a declaration, and popes were very powerful at the time, more powerful than they are today. So he issues a declaration and he says that we will give the remission of sins, meaning we'll forgive the sins of any Christian who will wage holy war against the Muslims over there. And they use the term holy war. It's not a Muslim term that started up. So knights arrive from the region of France and they come in and they start attacking during this week time. So in the year 1063, Barbastro was taken. They massacred the people there. Females were violated in front of their families. People were hacked to pieces. Muslims were thrown into hot boiling oil. It was a really massacre that took place. In the year 1085, an important city by the name of Toledo fell to Alfonso VI of Castile. And if you look at what's happening, who helped Alfonso? One of the Muslim leaders by the name of Al-Mu'tamid of Seville. He teamed up with Alfonso against the Muslims so that he can get some more power for himself. So he goes, helps the Christian crusader comes in, take over the Muslims, massacre them, and then he realized that, wait a minute, it looks like these guys are going to come after me next. So he realized that he made a mistake. So what does he do? He goes and he gets scared, and he moves down to this area, North Africa, and he goes over there and he says that, you know what? At that time, there was a man by the name of Yusuf ibn Tashfin. He had started a movement called the Murabitun. Very powerful group of Berbers. Very strong, and they had unified that region. So he said, can you please come and help us against these Christian crusaders who are, taking over our land? So Yusuf ibn Tashfin comes with the Murabitun army, goes in, helps repel the Christians. And the guy, the Muslims, they say, thank you so much. They're all still 33 states fighting each other. Say, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. You can go back to Africa now. We don't really need you here anymore. So he says, okay. He goes back. 2 years later, Alfonso attacks again. They're still so weak politically. He calls Yusuf ibn Tashfin again. Says, can the Murabitun come over again? Please help us out against these Christians who are attacking us. So he goes again for the second time. And then some of these leaders, they go and they say, you know what? This guy is becoming really powerful. What if he takes over our little kingdoms? We're going to have a problem. So they tried to poison him. That's the thanks that he gets, right? Tried to poison him. They didn't kill him. He goes back to Africa. 2 years later, they attack again. They call him and say, we need your help the third time. Third time, he goes, these people are ridiculous, man. These 33 states who are fighting, they can't even do anything themselves. So he comes back in for the third time, and this time he says, I'm not leaving. So once he deals with the Crusaders, he goes and he takes over every single one of the 33 states, and he says, you guys are all gone. Gets rid of all these little princelings and stuff, and he takes over the entire region, and this becomes known as the Murabitun era, where they took over and they unified the entire region of Andalus, or the entire region of Spain for the Muslims at the time. What happens? That lasts for a period of time. About a century passes by. The Murabitun start to become corrupt over time. This is what happens. No matter how good someone is for a while, start out good, over time their generation, third generation, they start to decline, they start to get messed up. So they're on the decline. A lot of problems happening. A new movement comes in, known as the Muwahhidun, and they take over, and I'm not going to get into the detail of that. But what happens is, under the Muwahhidun, you also find massive intellectual activity happening, and that's where you find very important scholars, like Ibn Rushd, Averroes. You find the Jewish philosopher Musa ibn Maimonides, right? These are people who are studying, and they're prospering. So Spain is continuing to prosper in this region, right? During all this time that's happening, what you have is, I'm going to explain what this slide is, that in around the year 1212, everything starts to go downhill. Okay? Everything was kind of up, down, everything was not so bad, but 1212 it begins. Muslims are defeated at a place called Las Navas de Tolosa. The Christians come in, these crusaders, they come in and they break the Muslim power, and they start breaking them into smaller states. By the year 1236, Cordoba falls and is lost. So a lot of people, when they look at Spain, they say, well, Muslims were there for 800 years. Not all the region that we're looking at. So 1236, Cordoba is gone, not to be retaken. 1246, Murcia is gone. 1248, Sevilla or Ishbilia is gone. It's gone from Muslim hands. They're not in control of it at all. And as soon as they take over, Islamic learning is banished in those lands. It's interesting, you think about it, not one book comes out of those cities anymore. Not one scholar comes out of those cities. Even though Muslims are there, they're under Christian control, but they can't produce anything. But when Muslims were in control, you find the Jews having their scholars being produced. You find Christians having their scholars coming and studying. Muslims are not allowed to study. So the situation became really bad for Muslims already in the 1200s, in the 13th century. And then what happens is Fernando III, he unites Leon and Castile, and he comes and makes Seville the capital for the Christian empire at the time that's over there. The great mosque of Seville becomes the great cathedral. When Cordoba's lost, the great mosque turns into a great cathedral, which is what it is still until today. And what happens is that you have a lot of things happening to Muslims. Muslims have to wear special clothing. They have to identify themselves that this person is Muslim. They have to live in a separate section of the city. There's heavy taxation, way more than jizya ever was. They're regularly moved around different regions. So in 1247, 100,000 Muslims were expelled and kicked out of Aragon. Minorca was a region which enslaved all the Muslims in that city. In 1248, the Pope made an announcement and says, all Muslims are going to be taken as slaves. In the year 1250, no one is allowed to buy or sell for Muslims without having a special license. And Muslims are jailed and they're tortured. We're not talking about, this is not the Inquisition, by the way. This is in the 1200s. Muslims are jailed or they're tortured for refusing to eat pork or drink wine. They're being tested, right? There's surveillance taking place and they're seeing if Muslims are washing for prayer, making wudu. And if you are, that means you're practicing Islam. Islam is not allowed to be practiced. 1 century passes like that. There's only one place that's left for Muslims, and that's Granada. And what happens in Granada, even though it's such a bad situation for Muslims everywhere else, Granada is completely independent and it's flourishing because there's a Sierra Mountain region that's actually blocking them, so preventing them from being attacked. That's where you find the Alhambra, being built. We have another picture? No, there's one picture. Beautiful architecture, beautiful place. So you have all of this taking place until about 1492. And, to make a long story short, 1492 is when Granada fell. And Granada was pretty much the last city that belonged to Muslims in this entire region. But the story doesn't end. It doesn't just end. And by the way, 1492 is an important year for 2 reasons. One is the fall of Granada, and the second is Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? 1492. And what's ironic is that Columbus, if you remember my presentation about American history, Columbus was not given the money by Ferdinand and Isabella to undertake the expedition to go and sail to wherever he thought he was going to. He thought he was going to India. Pretty far off, right? But anyways, when he made it to America, so the gold that was acquired by the attack against Granada was actually used to fund Columbus's voyage to America. So the discovery of America is directly connected with the fall of Granada, which is the last city that was controlled by Muslims at the time. But it wasn't done. So what's interesting is what happened. What did Muslims do afterwards? So what you have is European countries start coming up. They've been translating the knowledge that they learned from the Muslims. But what do the Muslims do? After Granada, for 5 years in Granada, Muslims are safe. They're allowed to practice their religion. Everything is like, okay, well, it's not that bad for us like it was in other cities. They made a treaty. They surrendered the city, all of that stuff. But after 5 years, the persecution began. Now, the first question is, why did they even leave the Muslims around? Because the Muslims were the most educated people. They were very skilled people. So they were needed to go and build buildings. They were needed to translate books. They were needed to, do research because they were the most educated people at the time in that region. So they didn't want to just remove them. But then all of a sudden, they decided, after 5 years, the Archbishop of Valencia, he sends a letter to the king, and he says, quote, and this letter is preserved, "We have resolved on the expulsion of this evil race," and the persecution begins. And the first act, many people have learned about Ferdinand and Isabella in their school and stuff like that. What's the first thing Isabella did? Isabella said, the first thing we got to do to persecute the Muslims, we're going to destroy all of the bathhouses in the entire city. Cordoba had 900 public bathhouses. They showered, they bathed. Right? First thing we got to do, we destroy all of them. Can you just imagine what the first thing, how do you persecute Muslims? Let's destroy all the showers in the region so that no one can bathe. You say, well, why would they do that? They did that because Catholicism at that time, washing regularly was considered to be a heathen custom. It was considered to be something that, this is what these foreigners do, and it's like an evil thing that they're doing. And in fact, if you look at it, like the nuns and the priests, they used to boast about how much we've given up and renounced the world partly by them not bathing at all. They would not bathe for months or even years, some of them. So it became really bad. The situation got really bad for Muslims. A law was passed, and all of this has been documented. A law was passed May 25th, 1566. It says the Moors, referring to the Muslims, they had to abandon the use of Arabic. They need to change their dress. Their doors must remain open every Friday. Now, why does your door have to remain open Friday? Just in case, secretly, you're trying to pray Jummah prayer in your house. You're trying to pray on Friday. We want to make sure that no one is trying to gather, come together or do any prayer like that. January 1st, 1568, all Muslim children are ordered between the ages of 3 to 15. They have to go to school. And they have to learn Castilian. They have to learn Christian doctrine. And basically, they're going to be brainwashed now. So what did the Muslims do? They launched a rebellion. They responded back and they said, we're not going to take this anymore. So they fought back. Small group of Muslims. They came together, no military training, no weapons. And they started fighting back. And their last stand was at a place called Alfajores. I've been there. It's very interesting to stand there. It's very sad to see this was the last place where they were in the high peaks of Spain. If you ever get a chance to go, I recommend you go. They started with 4,000 people. Their movement rose to 30,000. What happened was the Ottoman Empire was actually funneling in munitions and funneling in weapons through the Mediterranean Sea. You find that the Muslims in Morocco were sending in arms as well. So this was an international movement to go and resist this occupation that was taking place. And finally, despite all of everything that happened between 1609 and 1610, that's when the Inquisition was, fully underway. There were secret operations coming, and they basically removed all of these people. And Muslims were pretty much, at this point in time, they were completely removed from the Iberian Peninsula. It says the Moriscos, referring to the Muslims, even Muslims who pretended to be Christians, all of them need to depart. They all need to be out of this land. They're not allowed to remain anymore. Everyone was gone, and the mass persecution continued. The last persecution or prosecution against the Muslim for a crypto-Islamic practice was in Granada in the year 1727. So until 1727, they are still removing as many potential Muslims who are pretending or doing something that resembles a little tiny thing about Islam. And this is the amazing thing. And subhanAllah, I'll conclude with this. I was there, recently, and we were visiting some families. And one of the people we were visiting, they said something very interesting. One person came to them, and they said, my great-grandmother, one Muslim came in that area, in a village, in a farm area, and they were performing wudu and they were doing prayer. One random person, just random Spanish lady, she was old woman. She came and she says, my great-grandmother, she used to do exactly what you're doing right now. And I don't know what it is. Explain to me what it is you're doing. Because this woman doesn't know anything about Islam. She doesn't know anything about anything. And she says, this thing that you're doing, this bowing thing and all that, and the way you washed yourself, I remember in the fields in the farm, like 90, 80 years ago, and she's a great old grandmother now, I remember her doing this every morning before sunrise. And I never understood what she's doing. And she would get up in the dark, and she would do this kind of washing thing, and she would do some kind of movements, and I never got a chance to ask her, but I kept on doing that ritual for the last for decades. And I don't know what it means. I don't even know what I'm doing. But I did it just for her memory, and when I saw you doing it, I realized that's exactly the same thing I saw her doing. What does that mean? That means that until the present time, there are still people who are remembering some rituals of Islam in some form, some modified form, somewhere along the lines. And now, alhamdulillah, Islam is coming back and growing in this region despite everything that's happened. So we'll conclude with that, inshallah. We'll take some questions.
All right, so we'll go ahead and we have some time for QA. If you guys have questions, raise your hand. I'll bring the mic to you so that they can hear as well. So, questions?
You can answer.
Not everybody at one time. We have a question. Okay, sure.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Why the Ottomans did not reach to Spain?
Okay, I guess I'll answer that. Why the Ottomans didn't reach to Spain? So the thing is, they were being blocked because they had the Fatimids in the middle. So they were trying to deal with the Fatimids. So it's not just easy to just make it all the way to the west side. So they were actually helping the Muslims in Spain by delivering weapons over there. But in order for them to establish groundwork, it was very difficult for them because they're dealing with a giant empire. So it wouldn't have been practical at that time. They just took over Constantinople. So their focus was Eastern Europe at that time. You can't open too many fronts, like Sheikh Jamil said.
All right. Next question here on the right. Okay, sure.
Assalamu alaikum. I wanted to ask, during the Inquisition prior, where did most of the Moors go? Did they go back to North Africa, or did they stay there and they're converted?
So, I mean, when the Inquisition was happening and before that, when they were being persecuted, so the question is, where did they go? Right? So some of them moved back. They went back to modern-day Morocco, right? Or, Algeria. There was even a fatwa given by the Muslims who were living in Morocco. They're like, all of you guys need to get out of there. Why would you stay there? You know? But the thing is, they were still established. Someone has been living there for generations. So it was difficult for them to leave. So they actually remained there despite the persecution. They said, okay, they're going to make us wear a different colored dress, we're going to wear a different dress. They're going to tax us, they're going to tax us. But they had businesses established, they had everything established, and their education was still being utilized by the Christians. Right? So many of them did stay. Many of them left, many of them stayed. Yeah?
Assalamu alaikum. I just wanted to comment on where did the Muslims go after they left Spain. Just in general, the entire Muslim world was a place, but people, just like today, the concept of leaving a country as refugee and going, they weren't very accepted with open arms in Muslim countries. So like Morocco or North Africa, there's different places and different destinies. So in Tunisia, for example, they were welcomed and were allowed to reproduce their own cities in Spain. There are several examples architecturally and actually cities that are like identical to the Andalusian cities. But like Morocco wasn't very welcoming because they were so scared to open the border, and then you're going to get all this influx of refugees coming in. So there was like a resistance. But you can find them all the way in Egypt, even Turkey. And the new studies are like finding them in Latin America, like from Mexico all the way to the other places where they could go and dignify themselves and not have to be looked upon in a negative way by the Muslims as second class or as less than, if you wish, because they have been baptized or been living as Christians or have accepted Christian names. So one of the things that those Muslims were complaining about is we are not Muslims when we are with Muslims, and we're not Christians when we're with Christians. They actually complained that they didn't belong with the Muslims or with the Christians. They were something like in between. And maybe that's why Latin America was like a better place to go to than the Muslim world. Thank you.
Jazakumullah khair. Dr. Mariam is an expert on this field, so I'm glad you shared that. And I can also see the undertones of some frustration that's built into that as well, because some Muslims feel that way as well when they're in different communities. So this is a problem that has been going on for a long time. It's not something new. So it's actually good to know this history so we can contextualize it in our own day and age.
I have a question. Who was the last Muslim rulers in Spain when Spain fought out? Because since I was in high school, our teacher, when they teach us about the falling of Spain, the last ruler, the Muslim ruler, the last one, he was actually, when his military told him he has to run to Morocco, he has to leave, they were losing the battle against the Spanish soldiers, and he began crying. Then his mother told him a very famous sentence: "Don't cry as a man. Don't cry. You are a man, but you are crying like a woman. What you did, you and your people didn't defend and stand up as a man, and right now you are crying as a woman." So this is a famous sentence she told her son when he was defeated and he was trying to run to Morocco. So what was his name, and if you have any idea about his mother and this conversation when happened?
Sure. Okay.
And what was also the main reason that the Muslim, even they go and conquest and were spreading Islam in Spain, why they were being divided, and why they get so weak, they cannot defend themselves or stay more time or in Europe. Just
Okay.
they stick.
Okay, I can answer the first question. The second question is a long explanation. But so the first question is who was the last leader in Spain? The last city was Granada. So the last leader, his name was Az-Zaghal. So Al-Zaghal. Okay? So he was the last leader, and what happened was his nephew, his name was Bu Abdul. Okay? Bu Abdul betrayed his family and actually teamed up with the Christians against the Muslim leaders in Spain, in Granada, his own family, and he teamed up with them and he took over the city. He thought by taking over the city and helping the Christians come in, he's going to get to keep the city of Granada. Then he realized that they actually stabbed him in the back, and they said, "No, we're not going to let you keep the city. The city belongs to us." So he had to hand over the keys to the city, and when he was leaving, when he realized that he had been betrayed, while he was leaving, there's a story about his mother. His mother's name was Aisha. So when he was leaving, and actually, I was standing at that spot where it said this, the place happened. The last place when you're leaving Granada and you're walking and you're about to go down the hill where you can't see the city anymore, he looked back at the city, and he was with his mom, and he started crying because Muslims have lost one of the most amazing cities that have ever existed in history. So when he started crying, his mom said, you're crying now, you're crying like a woman right now because you couldn't defend the city like a man. So became a very famous statement that, you should cry like a woman since you couldn't be a man and actually fight for the city because he abdicated the city. So that's the thing. The second part, we don't have time to answer, inshallah.
All right, so on that note, because Isha is just in a few minutes, just a few final announcements and some points. I want to thank both Sheikh Mustafa and Sheikh Jamil Besada for taking time and putting in, of course, a lot of hours of research and study into this matter. So we want to thank them for the sacrifice. A few things. Number one, Sheikh Mustafa touched on it before his part, and that is the importance of education, right? And that is at CIU, California Islamic University, is very important. As you know, it's been going on now. We're on our 7th year. Sheikh Mustafa, I think Sheikh Mustafa's 7th year. It started here. Alhamdulillah, as you know, the university is just down the road, less than a mile. For those of you, if you're not aware of the university and the different programs it has, you have to tap into that, and you have to learn, and we have to learn as a Muslim community about our religion. So you can visit more at calislamic.com. The quarter just started maybe a few weeks ago, right?
We have the history class available online as well.
Right, so we have a lot of classes, history class and other classes that are available online as well. So I would encourage you, please, if you have your phones out, just go ahead and log on calislamic.com, check out the classes that they offer, and make sure to register and kind of get the word out to other people as well. This is an amazing program that we have and something that we need to kind of support as much as possible. Number two, as you know, one of the underlying themes here is, of course, da'wah and outreach, and calling people to the remembrance and the importance and to Allah Azza wa Jal, to the oneness of Allah. And that is, as you know, here at IIOC, we have a full-time da'wah and outreach department, right? And that is doing our best to go out and convey this message of Islam in many different platforms. So if you're interested, we have a da'wah table outside. You can sign up. We also have flyers outside in English and Spanish. I would encourage you to take a few flyers. Always keep it with you. You never know when you're going to come across someone that might be interested in Islam. Give them a flyer. Do your best, right? And last and certainly not least, 9:15 is Isha. If everybody can help us out, we'll go ahead and... IOK tomorrow? Yeah, there's an IOK conference going on tomorrow. I don't have the details with me. 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. At the Anaheim Hilton. Are they sold out or do they still have tickets? There's still tickets available, so we want to, of course, support all of our communities and our masajids and organizations. So if you're in a position and you're free tomorrow, it's an amazing lineup of speakers that are coming at the Anaheim Hilton, inshallah. So 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Go ahead and purchase your ticket, and inshallah, if you guys can help us out with those chairs, let's follow up the chairs. Let's put them on the racks. We'll make our way inside. 9:15 is the Isha, just about 1 minute, and we'll see you guys all there. Please get home safely, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله